Okay, we're live.
Hello, are we live now?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to our growth infrastructure planning panel for real, under somewhat difficult circumstances, but I'm glad we're actually having a panel meeting rather than combining it with a whole lot of other issues in a combined panel. As is norm before these meetings, I have an announcement to make relating to attendance at this meeting. And as follows: due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the Council's website for them to do so. Members of this meeting are asked to keep their microphones and cameras switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphones and cameras off once they have finished speaking. To indicate a wish to speak, members should request to do so using the meeting's chat function. At the end of the debate on each item of business, there will be a vote. Members should vote using the chat function by indicating for, against, or abstain, and I'll declare the result after each vote. Officers are in attendance, but will keep their cameras and microphones switched off unless called to speak. I don't anticipate this meeting will go on too long, but if it does start to drag on, we'll have a break as appropriate. So to open the business, membership changes. There are no membership changes to the panel, and we have one substitution: Richard Smith for David Barnard, an apology from Sharon Taylor, and a possible apology from Sue Featherstone. But at the beginning of each meeting, it is customary for all members to just introduce themselves for the benefit of the public who may be here. First of all, my name is Derek Ashley, and I'm Chairman and Executive Member for Growth, Infrastructure, Planning and the Economy. So I'll call other members in the order that I've got them. Richard?
Yeah, Richard Smith. I'm the member for Welling Division.
Right. Now, Sarah Bedford, I don't think's joined us at the moment. So, Stephen Bolton.
Hello, I'm Stephen Bolton, member for Hatfield Rural.
Okay. Sue Featherstone, are you with us? No. Okay.
Yes,
Steve Jarvis.
yes, Chairman, I'm with you. Sue
Oh, well done, Sue.
speaking.
Okay. You want to introduce yourself? Sue, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Sorry. Yes, Chairman, thank you. It's Sue Featherstone from St Stephen Division.
Thank you very much. Steve Jarvis.
I'm Steve Jarvis. I'm the member for Royston Western Rural, and I'm the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for this portfolio.
Okay. Asif Khan.
Good afternoon. I'm Asif Khan from North Watford. I'm the Labour Party spokesman for this portfolio.
Thank you. Paul Mason.
Afternoon, Chairman. Paul Mason, Conservative member for Hoddesdon South.
Thank you. Graham McAndrew.
Good afternoon, Graham McAndrew, Conservative member, Bishop Stortford Rural.
Adam Mitchell.
Hello, I'm Adam Mitchell. I'm the member for Broadwater in Stevenage, and I'm the deputy of this panel.
Sandy Walkington.
Sandy Walkington, Liberal Democrat member for St Albans South Division.
Thank you. And finally, Jane West.
Hello, I'm Jane West. I am the Conservative member for Bushy North.
Right. Thank you very much, members. So first of all, Chairman's announcements, and I have no particular announcements, but I'll ask at this juncture for members to declare any pecuniary or declarable interest related to any items on this agenda. And if you have some, perhaps you could indicate in the chat line. I see no indications, so we'll move on to item 1, which is the minutes of the panel meeting on the 7th of February. In the absence of any comment in the chat line, I will take it as an assumption that these minutes are accurate. Okay, thank you very much. Public petitions, no petitions have been received. So we move on to item 3, which is Hertfordshire Economic Recovery Plan, presentation from the LEP. And welcome to Neil Hayes, Chief Executive of the Hertfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership, who I think is going to give us a presentation. And we'll obviously have time for questions and discussions after the presentation has been concluded. So over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Chair. Can you just let me know whether you've got the presentation on screen?
I think I have. If anybody hasn't, please indicate in chat.
I'll just giving a brief update on where we are in terms of the performance of the economy and where the LEP and its partners are moving forward in terms of the recovery plan thus far. Obviously, it's still a very fluid situation, but hopefully this will be a short précis to a more ongoing engagement on this issue over the next coming months. In headline terms, if I start in terms of the productivity of Hertfordshire, so prior to the current COVID-related crisis, the economy was around 40 billion in terms of gross value added, which is a kind of proxy for the productivity of the county. And again, one of the most productive parts of the UK. We're estimating that to be taking a hit to the tune of around 5 billion, so a reduction of GVA down to 35 billion, which is it's not insignificant. So it's the equivalent to losing one of our key sectors, such as manufacturing or construction. So at the moment, a hit on productivity. We're estimating job losses of potentially around 60,000 over the course of 2020. Again, that's still very much to be determined, and actually that's come down from a forecast at the beginning of the crisis of around 100,000 jobs being lost. Obviously, we'll know more when the coronavirus job retention scheme winds down in October, as some of those figures begin to bite. But in relation to those figures, we still have around 160 odd thousand people furloughed in the county as of July 2020. So there's an expectation that a proportion of those may not end up in employment post-October. So we'll have to be mindful of that situation. And 52,600 claims have been made under the self-employment support scheme. So those people not in employment, but in self-employment. So over 200,000 people still on some kind of support or other, either self-employment or employment, which obviously we need to keep an eye on. The number of unemployed has already increased to 38,000 from July 2020. And just for comparison, that's over trebled from 12,000 at the same point last year. And interestingly, it's double the level that we've seen back in the recession of 2008-9, and nearest that one in the early 90s, for those of us that can recall when particularly Hertfordshire was hit by the decline of the defence industry and relocations to other parts of the country. So, you know, this is going to be significant in terms of jobs, whereas the last recession, I would say, there wasn't a huge impact on jobs. And I think some of that was borne out by changing in working patterns. And actually, anecdotally, we were picking up more incidents of commuting into London. Clearly, that's going to be very different for this current recession. Just a couple of other sort of figures in terms of current data. So just under £1 billion worth of loans have been offered from the government backed coronavirus business interruption loan, or the bounce back loan in Hertfordshire. So a significant amount of money that's offered out, and obviously looking forward when businesses are getting back up and running, the ability of some of those businesses to repay that will obviously be becoming a crucial consideration. We're already seeing anecdotal information via the Growth Hub about, you know, concerns about the ability to pay back within the 12 months period, or start paying back within 12 months period, being expressed by some of those businesses. So that obviously remains a concern. And the sort of final figure was the nearly £200 million of grants that have gone through the Small Business Grants Fund scheme distributed by local authorities, or the additional retail, leisure and hospitality. So quite big numbers there, which I think are important to frame, the importance of what is happening in terms of the economy. I'll try and whiz through some of this data, but I thought it's important just to sort of show the sort of variances and how the impact is more varied on different parts of our economy in Hertfordshire. So if you look at the sort of July 2020 figures, you've got areas such as Broxbourne that currently have a higher proportion on the unemployment rate than in England or the UK average, and that is quite a variance between sort of 4.2% compared to 6.7% across the county, 4.1% in East Herts. But even those areas that historically have had very low unemployment, we've seen a significant increase. So East Herts itself, although the numbers are low, you're seeing a year-on-year increase over the past 12 months of 268%. So nowhere is not being being unaffected by this, but other areas are still are going to be suffering more than others. I think it'd be safe to say coming out of this. And again, when you look at some of those furlough figures, where people are, proportion of the workforce that are on the job retention scheme, you can see again Broxbourne as 32% of the workforce, whereas places like St Albans it's 24%. And again, a lot of that can be seen as the relation of the makeup of the industry, where people are remote working. So, broadly speaking, those parts of Hertfordshire that are more people employment in those sort of areas that are required to be in work, either sort of distribution, warehousing, food in particular. Obviously, that requires more people to work. Interesting places like Stevenage have been historically low, actually because of the advanced manufacturing sector there and the life sciences sector there pretty much carrying on as normal. So the GSK campus and the Airbus facility have kind of just gone on. Obviously, they've had to make sort of amendments to working practices, but they've carried on as normal. So it's not necessarily kind of a one-size-fits-all in terms of what's happening. And again, when we've been looking about where this is impacting on sectors. So those professional life sciences sector, for example, the science, the ICT, those unsurprisingly have been able to remote work in terms of numbers far more than those in terms of accommodation, food, arts, entertainment and recreation. Again, none of this will be probably a surprise to members of the panel, but we have now the data to demonstrate how this is impacting on our places. And this is another example of remote working. So you've got variances there from places like Welwyn, Hatfield, St Albans, Three Rivers, etc., Watford, that probably have more instances of people that are either that would historically have commuted or that are working from home. We're using these sort of facilities we've got in front of us, as opposed to some of those sectors that places that are more reliant on sort of less digital enabled resources. So part of what we can kind of do is see how resilient some of our places are or not through all of this process, and that can help determine where the recovery plan needs to sort of prioritize its resources. So I think in summary, there will be a jobs problem in Hertfordshire that is going to impact in different places and on different sectors more than others. Probably more of a jobs problem than we had in the last recession, being honest. But I think whilst that is of concern, the kind of economic fundamentals of Hertfordshire in terms of our skilled workforce, our connectivity, our employment in growth sectors, they are still there and they are not broken. So our ability to bounce back should be more pronounced than other parts of the UK. However, we still need to understand, what short-term action is needed to help businesses bounce back, and I can talk a bit about what the LEP and partners have been doing in relation to that. But also, some of these things are going to lead to long-term structural change. We know that retail was heading for choppy waters before all this. I think what's happened is it's just accelerated by 5 years what's going to happen in terms of the impact on the high street. Obviously, leisure and hospitality also is currently very much impacted, but has the opportunity to bounce back. So what we need to have is kind of the ability to sort of respond quickly to short-term measures, but also think about those longer-term plans and how do we make sure that people within Hertfordshire have the best opportunity to grow with future-proof, wherever that's possible, related jobs in the county. So the LEP has been working on a recovery plan. That plan has just been published. I'll put a link to the plan on the chat so people can access it on the website. I think it's been distributed as well through the usual sort of circulation that the LEP has in terms of groupings, etc. But I'll send a link just in case. So there's two main elements, and what we're calling kind of 5 packages. The ones in the centre are primarily the areas around productivity that the LEP has been focusing on, around enterprise innovation, skills and creativity, and international trade and investment. So, as I said earlier, those assets that we've got around those key sectors, be it creative industries, life sciences, advanced manufacturing, ICT, etc., that have been able to thus far weather the storm to a greater or lesser degree. We need to make sure that we can wrap around those and continue to grow. Going into the crisis, they were featuring in the industrial strategy, if you may recall, as a long-term opportunities for Hertfordshire. I think we probably need to double down. And you might have picked up that the LEP was successful in securing about £18 million worth of the Getting Building Fund to invest in infrastructure schemes to help bounce back. So we've invested in such schemes such as expansion of Elstree Studios, facilities at the Royal Veterinary College, the Cell and Gene Catapult up in Stevenage, and all other enterprise facilities dotted around areas such as Broxbourne, etc. So very much a focus on trying to continue to maintain those assets and let them to grow, and also looking at the opportunities about job transition into those sectors, which goes on to the next package around skills and creativity, that we know there are still going to be a jobs problem. Not all of those sectors have reached a critical mass yet, but they're beginning to do so. I think the cell and gene sector has now got as many employed around the GSK campus as was in GSK itself 10 years ago. You'll have seen the recent announcements around Sky's continued investment in the joint venture with NBC for the studio facilities at the bottom of the A1M. We need to make sure that we continue to have a throughput of highly skilled people locally that can provide those jobs that are going to be hitting the marketplace over the next couple of years. So that's a real focus, working with industry. We're developing sector action plans, so we've had some round tables with industry, and we will continue to do so. Trying to figure out what their explicit needs are and drawing resources and working accordingly. Also, we've also been supporting through the likes of Visit Hearts, which we co-invest with alongside the County Council to support industries that have obviously been suffering. So we've been repurposing some of our grant schemes. We've introduced a relatively modest crowdfunder scheme to help people in those industries pivot, adapt new technologies, etc. So it's about trying to transition both people and businesses in the most sort of opportune way possible. And we've got some really good case studies of companies being able to pivot and move forward, which has been really encouraging. This has been placed a strain on a number of our partner organisations, such as the Growth Hub. So I think there's been about 500% increase, unsurprisingly, in people wanting business advice and guidance. We've also established a peer-to-peer network alongside with the university to help businesses not only deal with the current crisis, but offer some kind of mentor that's related to their sector to help them grow out of have a long-term plan for how they get out of the current economic crisis. So there's lots of work that has been focused on the short term, but I think as we're coming out of this, it's about we're saying in the recovery plan a 2 to 3 year process to make sure we can fully recover back to where we were pre-crisis levels. The other area which I think has probably been fairly underplayed in Hertfordshire is around international trade and investment. Inward investment has been an opportunity for Hertfordshire, but LEP included, we haven't majored on this in recent years, and I think we need to do a lot more work in encouraging in investment into the county and in terms of international trade. That's the main sort of packages that the LEP's been focusing on, and I think the other two are more in the territory of working with the Growth Board around the whole place shaping agenda. There's clearly big challenges for our high streets and town centres. I also think there are big opportunities for towns in Hertfordshire to repurpose some of those town centres for employment use, for digital remote working, for example, where you're going to see, and we're anecdotally getting this from inquiries coming out of London, of people wanting to have space where they can collaborate and work in a safe environment. So, you know, what you're going to have is some of a more of a hybrid model. You're not going to have everybody either what they're doing at the moment working completely at home, not going to go back to working 5 days a week. So what in that space in between can we provide in Hertfordshire as an opportunity for bringing employment and workspace back into those town centres? And the other transformational programme is around how do we make sure we have the right digital connectivity and utilisation to do that as well. So as well as the transport connectivity, we have hopefully a workshop in place starting tomorrow with key stakeholders to try and get a grip around where does Hertfordshire need to be in terms of both the underpinnings of the connectivity but the utilisation. So how can we repurpose ourselves, particularly in attracting investment to companies that have their workforce in Hertfordshire, maybe taking up more of a presence in Hertfordshire than say central London. So that we think that's a real opportunity moving forward. So that's the framework. Just to sort of reiterate that you often see lots of different organisations involved. You know, the LEP has very much a family of brands. I talked about Visit Hearts, but also Careers and Enterprise companies, been doing lots of work with schools around trying to make sure that there's an understanding of transition into the workforce. HOP, I would encourage, if those of you who are not familiar with it, Hertfordshire Opportunities Portal is a fantastic resource online to help young people, parents and teachers understand what opportunities are available. So we will be very much pushing the Kickstart scheme, which was announced recently, about getting 16 to 24-year-olds sort of paid training and employment, as well as apprenticeship opportunities. We're trying to make sure that that becomes a real centre of gravity for people, both identifying opportunities for training and jobs, but also employers posting job opportunities and training opportunities on the website. Innovation Quarter, I think that's a real opportunity to, government is making noises around clean growth and green growth. How do we make sure our enterprise zone is successfully attracting that growth into the county around off-site construction, building on what we've got at BRE and Rothamsted, etc. And I talked about the Growth Hub as well. There's been significantly more resources going into the Growth Hub in recent months, unsurprisingly from government, to ensure we've got capacity to deal with the current crisis. But I think moving out, it's about trying to get a cohort of companies that can both be resilient but that can grow in the future. I'll finish on this final slide, and this is about kind of how the LEP is particularly working in other guises. So again, I imagine members are familiar with the Growth Board. Clearly, a recovery and devolution white paper is imminent, or perhaps not so imminent as we first thought, but at least out before the end of this year. That will obviously have recovery as well as devolution as part of the agenda. So the role of LEPs, the role of other organisations and institutions will be clearly up for debate there. We're getting a lot of positive feedback on the role of LEPs centrally from central government in terms of the work we've responded to quickly. So we're hopefully positive about securing more resources for our activity going forward. But obviously, the other activity that we've been involved in is something you may not be familiar with. It's called Catalyst South. That is a collection of 6 LEPs covering the southeast of the country, going from Hertfordshire, Essex, Kent, Surrey, Sussex, Hampshire, down to the Isle of Wight. What we're trying to do there is advocate for the economy of the southeast in a very noisy government debate over levelling up and supporting parts of the country that are going to be affected by the crisis. We are trying to make sure that the needs of the South East are represented as well. There is a meeting between the LEP chairs and Minister Jones, I think, in a couple of weeks to discuss how we take this forward. So there's an appetite to discuss how we can represent and compete with the likes of the Northern Powerhouse or the Midlands Engine, which is getting increasingly more airtime with government on investment opportunities. And again, I clearly EU exit, very topical today. That is going to have a significant impact on our economy, depending on which way it goes, which seems to be more on the out than any other opportunity. So that is why we are saying that the recovery plan, as was published last week, will probably need further revision over the coming months, both in terms of government policy, but also in terms of the impact of EU exit. I'll end there and happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. It's a relatively short few slides there, but if we can get those circulated to members, that will be handy. Now, I'll just throw it open to any questions or comment from any members who just like to indicate in chat. Then I'll pick things up as we go along. Now, I've got Sandy Walkington first, then Steve Jarvis. Sandy.
Yeah, actually, Neil, this is not a question. You may not be able to answer this, but I was advised in the pre-meeting that nobody else would be able to answer this particular question. It concerns the performance monitor, which is item 8 on our agenda. And there are some tables there which apparently the LEP provides. And there's a table about the proportion of population aged 19 to 64 qualified to at least level 4 or higher. That's page 359 for colleagues who can flip through their electronic agendas. And it shows a satisfactory increase in terms of proportion of population, but it's the target I'm surprised at, because the target suddenly plunges. And last year, we hoped that 42.2% of the population would be qualified to that level. And before that, it was 41.4. And before that, it was 39.8, i.e. we were raising our target all the time. And then suddenly it's plunged to 40%. And I wondered what had driven that less ambitious target for people educated to level 4. And particularly in the light of hoping to grow our economy and come out strongly from COVID.
Can you answer that, Neil?
I need to check that.
Well, perhaps you can
I can't give an instant response, but I'm more than happy to.
Yeah, I guess that.
Well, I mean, it's a bit premature because the item's at the end of the agenda, but we'll raise it then, Sandy, and we'll get a reply to you.
I was just told by the officers that Neil would be the only person who could answer.
I see. Oh, right. Yes. There we are, Neil.
To me, it sounds like an anomaly, personally. Yeah. So that statistical difference doesn't sound right to me. So I'll need to go and check and make sure someone hasn't inputted some wrong data somewhere down the line.
Yeah,
okay, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. Steve, you're next.
Thanks. You showed a chart that indicated that across the county, something like 25% of people are currently working from home. And although the number who do that permanently has probably declined somewhat, the whole business of where employment exists has become much more fluid. There are now many more people who are working in Hertfordshire, who are working for organisations that aren't based in Hertfordshire. And that kind of raises some interesting questions about what the LEP's objectives are in terms of that kind of economic activity. Because it's providing jobs in Hertfordshire, these people are spending their money in Hertfordshire. The fact they might go one day a week to somewhere else to meet up with some colleagues doesn't really have a big impact in the way that it did when people used to get on a train or drive everywhere to someone else. So how's that going to be reflected in your plans and targets?
Well, I think in part is why we are trying to encourage this dialogue with the wider South East, and that includes a dialogue with the GLA, and there's an equivalent organisation called LEAP in London, which is a version of a LEP. And one of the key drivers is what you've just described, and the fact that London's workforce is dotted around those home counties at this point in time, and that I see that as a real opportunity for Hertfordshire to possibly reposition itself. And if we can get people who possibly spend less time commuting 5 days a week, that may well work from home a couple of days a week, possibly work from some shared space in and around Hertfordshire and collaborate, then we've got the ability to have people spending more of that money in Hertfordshire than they would do in London. Now, I know that's the kind of, somebody loses from that, and we're clearly seeing London is losing out from that kind of trade, but with every sort of crisis comes an opportunity. And I also think it's an opportunity to kind of rebalance the relationship, and which is why, as a group of LEPs, if you look at the size of the economy around London, it's almost as big as London itself. So, you're talking it's around 300 billion. So it's almost the size of an EU member state, which currently doesn't have a voice on economic issues. So we've had tentative conversations with the GLA, who are quite encouraged to have further dialogue. We've had some regional roundtables with businesses who are very keen to work on a more collaborative, non-border associated way. So, for example, the creative sector, a lot of it is essentially Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire and West London. So I think this new way of working gives us a new way to sort of respond. And I think that part of that response, the challenge for LEPs, is to not necessarily be as parochial about responding to some of these activities and actually work in a more collaborative way. But I definitely think for Hertfordshire, there are more opportunities. I remember at a previous panel I was talking about the loss of employment land being a big issue, and it still is. But again, anecdotally, we're getting queries from employers into what previously I would say were considered more outdated stock of employment land in terms of old out-of-town business parks and old what we'd call science parks.
Yeah.
There's a lot more interest in those now from employers in London that have got space, space where their workforce can either cycle or drive to. And actually, I think a number of the banks are talking about repatriating parts of their estate in and around the southeast to accommodate the workforce, as well as being a front of house. So I think whilst there are challenges, there are opportunities, and I think this is where we need to work collaboratively with the Growth Board around bringing that economic opportunity into the place shaping for some of those town centre regeneration plans.
But it also poses some challenges in terms of how you measure the size of the economy, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, roughly about a third of the workforce at the moment, we say, commute into London. A large part are not doing so. It's then the challenge of what can we get that workforce to do to sort of stay more in Hertfordshire. So part of it is speaking to employers about how can we, as a place or a bunch of places, provide the sort of infrastructure to enable collaborative working. Now, whether that's better broadband, whether that's more facilities in town centres so people can meet clients, etc., and have team meetings, all that kind of stuff. It's taking that, and actually, I think what we'll end up doing is maybe trying to pilot in a few places how this could work with some resources from government.
All right, Steve. Okay, Asif, you're next.
Thank you, and thank you, Neil, for that presentation. You mentioned about the 60,000 potential job losses in Hertfordshire, and again the reassessment after the furlough scheme ends in October. So my question is actually more related to the types of jobs that people are losing, or the economy is losing, so which sectors in particular are being lost. And my second thing is about when there is unemployment, and unemployment is going to happen, about training and skills, and whether training providers, that could be colleges or it could be other training providers, are they geared up to take on that particular responsibility of retraining people into the skills that are actually needed?
In answer to your first question, it's probably no surprise to you that the biggest is retail. So it's mostly retail related jobs that we've seen the biggest increase, and with that, leisure and hospitality. Even despite getting that sector, trying to get that sector back on its feet, there have been significant job losses. That's tempered slightly with increased opportunities around logistics, So where we've all moved to sort of online shopping at a far more degree, there are clearly employment opportunities in and around Hertfordshire in relation to that sector. I mean, Ocado's got a good example of how that's been pivoting, and they're taking on additional jobs to deal with I think the Marks and Spencer contract either launched last week or this week. So that's a good area where a lot of those skills can be transitioned into slightly different elements of that sector. I think coming into the crisis, there was already a challenge about people employed in the care sector, and that is a good example of where we need to sort of look at people that were employed in retail. They often have this skill set that could be applied into the care sector, for example. And I think the others, I mean, we're trying to put together a task force with the likes of the Department of Work and Pensions, with FE colleges and training providers, to have more of a real-time kind of brokerage facility that we get stuff through, that if we hear on the negative side, significant redundancy that have been made, that we can kind of redistribute that workforce to other potential people in the supply chain. But likewise, work with the training providers to make sure that the throughput of young people in particular is realistically targeted to those jobs that have significant growth potential. So a good example is, we talk about cell and gene sector up in Stevenage, and which is growing, and actually there's a lack of physical space to accommodate these businesses now. That's not all about people in lab coats, with test tubes, etc. There's a massive manufacturing and distribution and logistics arm that supports that, and they are well paid, highly valued technical sort of T-level qualification type jobs that we should be exploiting. The issue there is, do we have enough space and accommodation? So we need to work with the industry to try and decant some of that demand to other parts of the county where possible. So that's one example. So it's very much trying to work with the grain of where the industry is going, and actually a lot of the plans that we had in place coming back to this are still valid, and we just need to sort of go back to those and keep going and focus on those areas that are likely to have long-term job opportunities.
So in terms of the 60k, is it mainly the young people, or is it sectors? Is there like an age demographic?
I think the biggest cohort within that 60 is, in the biggest cohort in the 38 that's already been that are already on the claimant count has been in the 16 to 24 cohort. So I think at least between 35-40% was in that cohort. So not exclusively so, but there is a challenge around providing those opportunities, which is partly why the Kickstart scheme that the Chancellor was launching last week has been put in place. That's obviously similar to the scheme that was launched in the last recession. What I think the challenge we've got is trying to make sure employers understand what's available, and I think there is a brokerage role in a lot of SMEs just can't manage the bureaucracy of taking forward a trainee or apprentice, and we need to work with the likes of colleges as intermediaries to try and reduce some of that back office bureaucracy on their behalf. So one of the objectives of the task force we're pulling together is to do just that. So it's trying to make sure that if there are jobs within SMEs and micro businesses, the businesses themselves are not put off by the fact that there's a lot of bureaucracy involved in taking on a young person.
Okay, I see.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Now, I've got no one else indicating they wish to ask any questions or make any comments. So I think it's been a very useful discussion, actually, and thanks for coming along, Neil, and making that presentation. I think I remember the phrase re-engineering the town centres. I thought that was quite a sort of exciting vision, really, because I think there are real opportunities, as you say. If half the people who are usually travelling up to London aren't travelling up to London, I think that's a big opportunity. Yeah. As you say, somebody may lose, somebody may gain, but it could be a big opportunity for Hertfordshire. But thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you.
Just for the record, can I ask everybody to indicate that they will note the presentation? I think committee just like to have that formally on the chat. So if you can put in noted on the chat, assume you're happy with that, we'll move on. All right. Okay, thank you very much indeed, everybody. Thank you. I think we're... All right, okay, we'll move on then to item 4, public consultation on the draft waste local plan and design guide regulation 18. Now, I'm assuming Bilal is available to present this report.
Yep.
Good afternoon, Bilal. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just bring this up. Can you all see that?
I think so. If anybody can't, please indicate in chat, but I think we should be okay.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, panel. Today I will be presenting the current draft version of our waste local plan, which is recommended to be taken to public consultation, alongside a draft supplementary planning document guiding the design considerations for new waste facilities. So we'll start off with a little bit of background. As the Waste Planning Authority, the County Council has a statutory responsibility to prepare and implement a waste local plan. The review of our waste local plan began in 2017, and we have made significant progress through the stages of the review. It should be noted that the responsibilities of the Waste Planning Authority differ from those of waste disposal and collection authorities, and the collection and disposal of local authority collected waste do not fall under the remit of this panel and are not the focus of the draft consultation. So the first stage of the review involved the gathering of evidence and early stakeholder engagement, with the first formal consultation in the review of the waste local plan being the initial consultation, which was undertaken from February to March of 2018. This received a total of 551 individual representations. A summary of the representations made to the initial consultation, along with officer-suggested responses and options for the way forward for the waste local plan review, was presented to this panel in July 2018. Responses to the initial consultation informed changes to the plan's vision and objectives, and also guided the preparation of the draft plan with updated and new policies to cover the issues raised in the initial consultation. Following this, a call for sites exercise commenced from July to September 2018, and a total of 12 sites were submitted. A summary of the call for sites exercise and the preferred option for progressing the waste local plan was presented to the panel in July 2019. This included the proposed way ahead for identifying sites and areas. The diagram in this slide shows the stages of production for the waste local plan. As you can see, we have passed the initial consultation stage and are now up to the second formal stage of consultation proposed as part of this review, the draft consultation. The main legislation which sets out the development of local plans is the Town and Country Planning Local Planning Regulation 2012, and this stage in preparation of our plan will follow Regulation 18 of this legislation. In line with national guidance, the draft waste local plan will cover a 15-year period from the date of its adoption. The draft waste local plan includes the key information required, such as a key diagram, targets and indicators, and strategic and non-strategic policies. The draft plan includes a total of 17 policies, consisting of 10 strategic policies and 7 non-strategic policies intended to guide the determination of applications. You can see the full list of policies in the slide shown. The strategic policies make sufficient provision for waste management and plan for long-term requirements beyond the plan period. The non-strategic development management policies outline the issues that will be considered when determining planning applications for waste management development. Following internal and external engagement, the resulting proposed policies have been developed for inclusion within the draft waste local plan and will be subject to revision following the proposed public consultation. A summary of the content and policies within the draft plan is set out in section 5 of the panel report. The waste local plan must work to maintain the network of waste management facilities in the county, whilst also providing opportunities for future waste management provision. In order to achieve and maintain a sustainable distribution of waste management facilities and to meet national policy requirements, all existing, planned and proposed waste management facilities are to be safeguarded in line with proposed strategic policy 2, so that they are not lost to or jeopardized by other types of development with an incompatible use. The emerging waste local plan has taken a different approach to identifying sites when compared to the current adopted waste local plan. The emerging waste local plan does not identify allocated sites, i.e. parcels of land potentially suitable for waste management uses, but instead identifies and safeguards existing facilities, which includes the HWRCs and 7 strategic sites. The household waste recycling centres and strategic sites are considered critical for the management of the county's local authority collected waste and construction, demolition and excavation waste. These sites will be safeguarded through the use of waste consultation areas, which cover a 250-metre buffer area around the site boundaries. Waste consultation areas will further safeguard and prevent the unnecessary loss of these critically important facilities. This slide shows how the 7 strategic sites and 17 HWRCs are identified within the waste local plan. As you can see, the site boundary is shown and land covered by the waste consultation area is also identified. The strategic sites and HWRCs are identified at Appendix 3 of the draft waste local plan. All district and borough councils will be required to consult the Waste Planning Authority on applications which fall within these areas, excluding those developments listed at paragraph 9.8 of the draft plan. In addition to safeguarding all waste facilities and identifying waste consultation areas for these strategic sites and HWRCs, the draft waste local plan supports future waste facility provision through the identification of anticipated growth areas. A key diagram for these areas is included in the plan and is shown in the current slide. These are areas within the county around large settlements that are facing pressure for growth as identified within the district and borough local plans. These areas are seen as suitable in principle for future waste management provision because they will allow for waste facilities to be located close to the origin of waste and subsequently reduce how far waste will need to travel via road. It is anticipated that through safeguarding strategic sites and HWRCs, identifying anticipated growth areas and providing a policy-based approach for the delivery of new waste facilities, that the emerging waste local plan will provide greater flexibility in the delivery of future waste management provision the county needs. The Waste Facilities Design Supplementary Planning Document, SPD, has also been drafted to supplement policies within the draft plan by providing more detailed advice and guidance on issues of design of waste management facilities. This version of the SPD constitutes the consultation version required to be carried out under Regulation 12 of the Local Planning Regulations. This SPD does not form part of the development plan and does not introduce new planning policies. However, it will be a material planning consideration in decision making. SPDs do not have to be submitted to the Secretary of State for examination, but do need to be consulted upon in accordance with the regulations. And so the purpose of the proposed consultation is to invite appropriate bodies and persons to make representation on the subject and content of the current draft plan alongside the evidence base and the SPD. These representations must then be considered in order to guide the remainder of plan production. The plan will then be subject to amendments and further consultation after the draft plan consultation. I would like to draw your attention to a few key evidence-based documents which will also be published alongside the draft consultation. So the Waste Capacity Gap Report is a key technical evidence-based document produced to support the review of the waste local plan and justify the need to plan for additional waste facilities based on anticipated gaps in waste management by varying waste types. Taking account of updated data and the responses to Chapter 8 of the initial consultation, the Capacity Gap Report has been updated with the latest waste figures from the Environment Agency, the County Council's own data, an up-to-date list of active waste management sites, as well as the chosen methodology for projection of waste arisings concluded on from the initial consultation. Secondly, a sustainability appraisal including strategic environmental assessment has been produced by appointed consultants, land use consultants. Sustainability appraisal is a legal requirement of plan production and it is intended to inform the ongoing preparation of the plan and ensures sustainable development concerns are fully integrated and alternative options are considered. The policies and areas in the waste local plan have been subject to a detailed appraisal against the SA objectives, which were developed at the scoping stage of the SA process. Generally, the vision, objectives and policies have been assessed as having an overall positive effect. It should be noted that there will likely be some minor changes made to the waste local plan before consultation as a result of recommendations made for the sustainability appraisal and the habitats regulation assessment. To conclude, the consultation is intended to run between 11th of January to 19th of March 2021. All submitted representations to the consultation will be taken into account and the proposed officer responses and actions to the representations will be brought back and presented to panel. Following this, a proposed waste local plan will be produced and this is currently scheduled to be published for consultation in 2022. I refer members to the recommendation in section 3.1 that the panel consider the documents and recommend to Cabinet that Cabinet recommends to County Council the approval of a 10-week consultation of the documents commencing January 2021. Thank you for listening. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Bilal. And this is the next stage of moving this strategic plan through the system. I know it always seems to take some time to do that, but there's a huge amount of technical work goes into these plans, and we have to take it step by step according to legislation. Now, I will formally move the recommendations in 3.1 on the order paper, and in doing so, invite any questions or comments. And if you have got any questions or comments, please indicate in the chat column. Stephen Bolton.
Thank you. Given that we're in the middle of the COVID problem at the moment, and COVID has seen a change in the makeup of waste that we have, much more packaging, much more recyclable, and probably more residual waste because people are staying at home. And we don't know at the moment how the economy is going to change permanently, whether this will be a permanent feature. To what extent have you allowed for changes in the composition of waste going forward because of more home working and just the change in which people work?
Bilal?
So the waste local plan doesn't actually set a preference for any specific types of facilities. It does prioritise local authority collected waste and construction, demolition, excavation waste, as those are our two largest. I think a lot of the responsibilities also fall within the waste disposal authority, as they are required to help with identifying strategy for the different types of waste.
Okay, so that's right. Okay. Second point, if I may, on page 52, you have got the pie charts which show the different waste.
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, page 52.
It is page 52, yeah, or that's it.
Yep, you've got
the agenda pack, page 19 of the report.
You've got the projected waste risings 2019 to 2033. It's just an observation that the actual increase in the risings, according to the figures, is just under 26%. The size of the pie charts make it look as though it's going up about 4 times. But just an observation that could be altered, I think.
Noted. We'll amend that.
Okay, thank you.
See if you can make it a little more in relation to the increase. Right, I've got Jane West, and then I've then got Steve Jarvis after Jane.
Hello, thank you. Can I just ask a question about the consultation when it goes out, the public consultation? How are we going to get that message out to the public to actually consult with us? Because I noticed on the previous one we got about 551, was it, people who replied. For the whole of Hertfordshire, that doesn't seem a high number. Do you know how we're going to get this message out this time?
Might pass over to John Tiley, he's in chat if he wants to give anything to this, but we do have a consultation portal that we do use. We do have a list of consultees from previous consultations we've done and involved parties. I think there is a challenge now that we will have to sort of move things more online.
It's not something that energises the public unless there's a particular local issue arising in terms of us suddenly wanting a big new site somewhere, and then we get 10,000 replies. But John, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we'll look at, particularly at this stage, which is a Reg 18, we're still encouraging the debate. So we will sit down with comms team to actually look at ways in which we publicise the consultation on the plan. you're right. It's a challenging time in as much as we got to do things in different ways, and it's even things like the fact that the regulations have now been changed in terms of local plan consultation to allow a lot more online virtual sort of consultation. So we'll be looking at the lessons that have been learnt in other consultations as well at the moment. But there'll be publicity. But I think bottom line is, as Derek set out, if it doesn't engage the public, it's going to be the consultations on the waste plan, to be quite honest, usually are more of interest to the industry and to local authorities who are dealing with the planning policy side of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Jane. Now, I just noticed I missed out Adam, but I did say Steve was next. So we'll do Steve Jarvis and then Adam Mitchell.
Thank you.
There you go, Steve. Steve, you're on mute. You're still on mute.
I'm clicking it.
No, you're not. We're okay now. You're all right now.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. The Waste Facilities Design Guide. I'm not entirely sure I understand the relationship of that to the policy, but I noticed the policy itself talks about a preference for rail-connected facilities and transport of waste by rail, but none of that seems to have made it into the design guide. And I assume it's a design guide that people are going to look at for the more detailed guidance proposals. So is there a reason why that's the case?
Okay, who wants to take that? Bill, John?
I mean, I think probably the fact is that it's the policies that are going to shape the location of a proposal coming forward, and the sort of the spatial dimension of where we're trying to promote the examination or the search for new facilities is kind of part of the plan. The design guide is really to sort of offer guidance in relation to sort of applications wherever they come forward, whether it be related to sort of rail facilities or not. So it's there to help us determine planning applications and push up the quality of facilities wherever they come forward.
But for example, the design guide talks about not putting waste facilities in air quality management areas.
Yeah.
So that sounds like a site selection issue.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's being encouragement to sort of avoid. Well, yes, encouragement that those facilities shouldn't make the situation worse in air quality management zones. But yeah, we can look at that in terms of whether we need to make more cross-reference. As I say, I think the principle would be that the spoke mentions are in the planning policies, and then the design guide is more about the considerations of the local site.
Okay.
Okay. All right. All right, Steve.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, fine. Adam Mitchell now. Sorry to have missed you earlier on, Adam, and then Sandy Walkington.
Okay. Thank you for the report. I noticed in paragraph 13.1 it talks about importing waste from outside the county, and I've tried to follow up footnote 21 to find out a bit more about that, but I didn't manage to. So I was just wondering, sort of, what are we importing, how much, what are we doing with it, and it mentions some sort of opportunities about putting that through higher up into the waste hierarchy. So could you give a bit more information about that, please?
All right. Who's taking that, John or Bilal?
So, I mean, Bilal might be able to sort of give you some of the details. In principle, I mean, the principle in terms of dealing with waste is to sort of, deal with your own arisings within your boundaries, and that's the sort of still the principle. In fact, being adjacent to London, the realities are that and the kind of the configuration of facilities that we do import some waste from London. Particularly, it will be the commercial and industrial types of waste, because there's no control over the boundaries. They'll go to the facilities that are available to them. So it'll tend to be that sort of facility, and sometimes that can be to the advantage in terms of creation of sort of aggregates for recycling and reuse. The other type of waste that, on a commercial basis, that comes into the county tends to be the green wastes and waste that go into our AD facilities, and so they tend to be sort of being dealt with sustainably. I suppose the biggest challenge, which members will be aware of, is the challenge that the County Council faces as the waste disposal authority, in as much as trying to find a solution to dealing with our own waste. And going forward, it looks as if residual waste after recycling and treatment from household waste recycling is going to be exported by Hertfordshire out of the county to other local facilities. But that's a sort of a general picture of the sort of the movements that go on and the main types of waste that we're dealing with from outside.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. So somebody across the border will be saying, "Why are we importing all this waste from Hertfordshire?"
Indeed. Well,
yes.
we all know we've tried very hard to deal with it within the county.
Oh dear. All right, Sandy, your turn.
Thank you. Actually, this is just a sort of nitpicking point, but just to show that I've read the papers. But Agenda Pack, page 62, page 29 of the report, paragraph 818, you list at the bottom of that paragraph Harper Lane Rail Aggregate Depot, and you put it in Hitchin, and I thought it was south of St Albans. I mean, is that my error, or is it just a slip there?
That I would say is a good spot.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Just showing that I've read the stuff. That's all.
No, I'm impressed.
Thank you, Councillor. Point noted.
I'm impressed. Okay. Right. I haven't seen any other notifications to speak. So on that basis, can we agree the recommendation on the order paper? And please indicate it in chat if you're happy to do that. Okay, thank you very much indeed. That looks like a majority, if not everybody. I think that's everybody. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we'll move on then to item 5, which is another part of our strategic planning policy agendas, which is adoption of the revised Minerals and Waste Development Scheme. And I'm looking for Daniel Clark. Is he around to present that? Hello, Daniel.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Good. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. I'm presenting to you the revised Minerals and Waste Development Scheme. The production of the scheme is a legal requirement of the Town and Country Planning Regulations and the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act. The purpose of this report is to advise the Cabinet Panel on the revised Minerals and Waste Development Scheme. The scheme details the planning documents that the Minerals and Waste Planning Authority intend to produce, a timeline for their production, and opportunities for public participation. The previous scheme was adopted by the County Council in November 2018 and covers the period 2018 to 2022. As the Minerals and Waste local plans have reached key milestones since the previous scheme was adopted and the planned production timelines have changed, there is a need to update the development scheme. Since the adoption of the previous development scheme, the proposed submission Minerals local plan was published for public consultation back in January 2019. Following this consultation, necessary changes were made to the plan. It's now intended that the Minerals local plan will undergo a second public participation event, and it's intended that this consultation will take place next year. The previous development scheme stated that the Minerals local plan would be submitted to the Secretary of State in 2019. However, it's yet to be submitted. Therefore, the development scheme should be updated. The proposed revised timeline for the Minerals local plan production is shown in section 5 of this report. Adoption of the plan has now moved from June 2020 to August 2022. Since the adoption of the development scheme, extensive technical work, site investigation and evidence-based work as described in the previous item, has been carried out for the review of the waste local plan. The work has informed the contents of the draft waste local plan. It's now intended for, that the draft waste local plan will be consulted on in January 2021, and this is after the time stated in the previous development scheme. The proposed revised timeline for the waste local plan production is shown in section 5 of the report. Adoption of the plan has now moved from October 2021 to February 2024. As described in the previous item, a new supplementary planning document has been prepared alongside the waste local plan. The Waste Facilities Design Guide supplementary planning document is also intended for public participation in January 2021. The Cabinet panel is asked to consider the revised development scheme and new timetable and recommend their approval at forthcoming Cabinet and County Council. It's intended that this scheme will be considered by Cabinet on the 21st of September and considered for adoption at County Council on the 20th of October. The development scheme will not be subject to public consultation or independent examination. The revised Minerals and Waste Development Scheme timetable is shown in Appendix B of the report. The timeline has been updated to reflect the changes in the plan production timelines and inclusion of the Waste Facilities Design Guide supplementary planning document. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Daniel. As you say, this is about process and timelines. I'm going to formally move from the chair a slightly revised version of the recommendation in the order paper, and I will move that that we recommend to Cabinet that Cabinet recommends to County Council that County Council improves the revised Minerals and Waste Development Scheme and new timetable. And having moved that, are there any contributions anyone wishes to make? Okay, in that case, please could you indicate that you agree that recommendation, please, in the chat line. We've got a few. There's a few more to go. That's it. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. All right. Thank you very much. That's clearly approved. Thank you, members, and thank you, Daniel. Moving on to item 6, draft local transport plan annual progress report. And to present this today, Catherine Ware. Catherine?
Yes, I'm here.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon as well.
You're going to turn your camera on. Oh, there we are. There we are. Very good.
I have appeared, hopefully, in front of everyone now.
Yes,
I'm great. I'm just going to do a very brief introduction to the latest annual progress report for the local transport plan. It is a factual report on what has been achieved by the County Council over the last financial year. So that's only up to the end of March 2020. The report highlights the many ways in which work has been done towards the main objectives of the local transport plan. And the plan is that this will become available on the Hertfordshire County Council once it's been agreed upon. The main thrust of the report is giving an overview of all the work that has been to achieve the local transport plan, and also looks at the status of supporting documents to the local transport plan, the performance indicators and major transport schemes, what's gone on with those so far, and the finances involved. There is a wealth of information available within the APR, and I hope you've enjoyed reading it, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions that anyone's got on it.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for being so succinct. That's always very welcome. But because we've got the report in front of us, I'm sure everybody's. I know everybody has read through it. So I'll now invite any comments. And I've got Adam Mitchell first of all.
Thank you very much for the report. I'd just like to say that I like the format of this report, particularly because there's lots of pictures in it. It's not too long, and sometimes there's sort of the question about how good we are at communicating what we do at the council, and I think this is a very good example of good communication of what we actually do as the council. So I think this is a really good report. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Adam. Steve Jarvis. Steve?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. Sorry, I seem to have problems with turning my microphone on and off. I agree with Adam. It's a nicely structured report that gives makes it very understandable to see what's happened. But I think we need to recognise that we've got some way to go in terms of achieving the objectives we're trying to in LTP4. If I look at the schemes that are highlighted for the North Arts area, for example, where I'm aware of what they are, they don't amount to things that are going to have a major impact on modal shift. There are some very welcome changes to the Belisha beacons in Melbourne Street in Royston, but I don't actually believe they're going to encourage a lot more people to cross the road there. And I think we have to recognise that this shows where we got to last year, and we need still to be looking at ways to do more. And I suppose the key is when we looked at the KPIs, in that there hasn't actually been an improvement in the sustainable mode share. And that is fundamentally what we're trying to achieve. And in terms of accessibility of new developments, which of course is not something that we're entirely in control of, but has nevertheless gone in the wrong direction. So I think that there's a need to, whilst welcoming what we've done, to recognise that there's actually quite a lot more that we need to be doing if we're going to achieve the LTP4 objectives in terms of changing the way in which people travel. I mean, there are some particular areas. The areas that relate to buses, of course, relate to an age that existed and up until March of this year, and the bus industry, in addition to all the problems it faced formerly, now faces a whole raft of new issues in terms of both capacity and people's reluctance to travel on crowded public transport. So I think that clearly that's something where we're going to need to think about what potential long-term implications are. A couple of detailed points. I noticed that the speed management strategy is part of an LTP4 sub-document. Having read the speed management strategy, that rather surprises me, because I don't think what it includes essentially supports the objectives of LTP4. But I no doubt people will say it in the consultation. And then finally, I see that it states that the North Central and South Central growth and transport plans are to be completed in July 2020. I guess that's a COVID victim, but where are we with those, and when do we now expect them to be completed?
All right. Thank you, Steve. Catherine, do you want to come back on that, on the timing of the completion of these studies?
Okay, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for your comments, Adam and Steve, with what you've mentioned so far. And I do agree with you as well about the fact that with active travel, we've got a long way to go with that at the moment. And I really feel that next year's report is going to be very interesting on that. With the actual supporting documents, I'm not certain about the actual dates, which a couple of them are coming back on. And as you already mentioned, I think that we have been a little bit of a victim of all the, because of the COVID situation, about some things being held back further than they should. But I can absolutely check on what dates and that now should be coming out, the growth and transport plan, and come back to you on that, rather than give you a date which may not be correct at this meeting.
That's fine, but if this is going to be published on the council website, then clearly we need not to be publishing things that haven't happened.
Yes. Yeah, so thank you for mentioning that.
All right. I've got Sandy Walkington and then Stephen Bolton. Sandy?
Thank you. I mean, probably just slightly echoing Steve Jarvis. I mean, there's lots of activity reported here, some of which is really clearly very good. It's as though one's lifted a flagstone in the garden and you can see frantic, sort of insect activity below, rushing in all directions. But the question is what it's actually achieving. And I guess in a year's time, and what you said just now, I think then the proof will be in the pudding as to whether we are actually making an impact. And I just wonder, because I mean, everything changes with COVID, and it's, this is rather an interesting historic document, as you point out, because only 3 weeks of it were when lockdown was happening, and what's happened to public transport and so on. I mean, it just completely turns things round. It might be quite interesting if next year's report has some comparative data, if it's possible to do it, to see how we're doing versus other benchmark authorities, just to see whether we are doing better, whether we're just the same as anybody else, whether we're doing worse. I think that might be quite interesting because, in St Albans, the one project that's highlighted is a new pedestrian crossing outside the Odeon cinema. It's again a very nice thing to have, but I don't think it's a step change in any way. I mean, it's a very nicely produced report, very easy to read, but I think that some hard comparisons might be useful next year.
Okay, thank you, Standy. Now, it's my mistake here. It's not Stephen Bolton. It's Stephen Giles Medhurst next. So, Stephen, good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you. I've been listening intently while also being on another conference call. Benefit of headphones, which I've now taken out because the other one's finished. One thing concerns me is the preamble to this whole document rather implies all this work has been done by the county council with no involvement of the district and borough councils. Now, I know for a fact that is not the case, and indeed I will highlight one that is totally the responsibility of the district council because you have my photograph in it. Thank you very much. In the document, and I'll refer you to the page when I scroll back down to it. And it refers to Three Rivers and Leavesden, and you have my photograph there with the off-grid solar streetlights, fully funded by Three Rivers District Council and not a penny from the County Council. Now, I have no problems with it being in this document, but I do really think credit should go where credit is due, where these have been joint schemes, and I'll scroll down in terms of my county division, because it's also mentioned in terms of the Clarendon Road Public Realm Scheme. That has been a joint scheme managed and run by Watford Borough Council with substantial money from the Local Enterprise Partnership, not the County Council, and Section 106 agreement, some of which I've signed off again this week to be agreed to do further works along there. So, when we do these reports, can we please make sure they are accurate in ensuring that our credit is given to other bodies that we are jointly working with, as we are with the Growth Board, and it's not just, as this could be implied, any one layman person, I think the phrase used to be on the Clapham Omnibus, reading this would imply all this has been superly done solely by the County Council. Now, turning back to other issues relating to this, and this is when I feel, again, and I have made this point through Chair when I come to the GRIPE meetings, either as a member or a backbenching, promoting walking. Great, we do that, but what we don't do, and it's also a bit of an issue, is that we don't make sure that the footpaths and indeed the cycleways are cleared of overgrown vegetation on a routine basis. I have in my division, in my area, a road which I was promised was going to have its hedges cleared twice a year. That was in July last year. They've yet to be done once, and I'm now told, oh, it doesn't make the default intervention levels and will be done later this month. In the meantime, as has been the case for the last 6 months, all the residents in these particular roads have to walk in the road because the footpaths are completely covered. Now, that does not promote walking. This is the question. This is strategic aims, yes, and this is, I've raised this before, and indeed at Policy and Resources on Friday, where you've got an issue in one format, i.e. the GRIPE panel and the strategic policies, but it's not replicated in the case of the Highways and Environment Committee in ensuring the work is done to ensure we do continue to promote walking and do keep our cycle lanes cleared of overgrown vegetation. The two need to be joined up if we are going to get anywhere near the modal shift we need. It's all very well having the policies, putting new cycle lanes in, new footpaths in. And if we don't put footpaths in that then ensure they don't pond at road junctions, which do happen, we don't get people using them. The things have to be joined up, Mr. Chairman, and I hope you would agree with me. We've got a long way to go to make sure that happens.
Well, it's very funny you should say that, because only in the last couple of weeks I've had exactly an issue like that locally myself. So I have some considerable sympathy in terms of what you're saying, in terms of our hierarchy that we've got in LTP4. And I do think collectively we all need to look at this and find some ways to find budget to actually improve our performance in these areas, because I think it's a bit like high risk gullies. There are certain footways that we want to encourage people to use, and I think we do need a much better hierarchy of how we manage and clear these footways. And certainly there are important access routes, either within towns or access routes into the countryside, that we need to make sure are encouraging people to walk and are not facing down traffic and having to walk in the road. So I've got some sympathy with what you say, and I'm sure that the Highways panel, where responsibility for this primarily lies, should be taking this on board. So you have my sympathy. Okay. Have we got any comment on that from officers, by the way?
Well, just first of all, thank you very much for the comments, and I absolutely take on board what you're saying about the credit. Very glad we got a picture of you in the report, and I will make sure that some credits are put in place. So, but with the footpaths, again, that's noted, and the message will get back loud and clear. And I know exactly what you're talking about, because I have also had issues like that with some footpaths. I can also just mention that I think the weather is almost against us, in the sense of, I think vegetation has grown even more quickly and wildly than in previous years, but well, that's only a minor excuse.
With all this extra carbon in the air, it might even grow even quicker in years to come. So we'll see. I mean, I don't know what other members feel about all this, but I think we've all had instances of this, so we do need to find a way forward to try and address this in the light of our own policy priorities and hierarchy within LTP4. Okay, thank you for that, Stephen. Did you want to follow up, Stephen? Are you okay now?
Thank you for that. Yes, I think we do need to work collectively together. It's not a political issue. I mean, it's find a way that we can all meet these objectives, and if it requires changing some priorities to ensure that overgrown vegetation, overgrown cycle routes are looked at, and not just we wait until they're completely blocked before we deal with them. And perhaps words with Phil Biddy from yourself would be helpful in that respect.
Yeah, no, I've already had words. I do think there is a sort of an analogy here with the the high risk gully thing. There are certain footways we need to prioritise. Clearly, it's going to be difficult to do it right the way across the piece, but I do think, I mean, maybe it's something we could have a look at in scrutiny. I don't know, but it is an issue. I agree. Right, I've got Jane West now.
Thank you. My comment is about cycling. It's really a comment in that, I mean, I don't cycle, but I do a lot of walking. And it's been obviously over the last few months, a lot of people uptaking on cycling. And I've been reading through the bits about cycling and the links for cycling and what people can do and where they can go. But I am concerned that we're not putting anything out about cyclists needing to have some degree of care for this person walking. And I've had 2 instances where I've been physically abused by cyclists because they seem to feel that I should jump into the hedge so that they can go by me. And I'm sure I'm not the only person this has happened to. And I just think we should be putting something out there as well about, as a driver, I don't expect people on cycles to leap onto the verge so I can keep going. And I just think cyclists need to be aware that they have some duty of care towards the person walking, and it's not their assumption that because there's a cycle mark on the pavement that it's their right of way. I'm not sure how anybody else feels about that.
I think it's a fair comment, and maybe something will refer to comms, because you know, we could have possibly a minor comms campaign on this, because you're quite right, and we want to encourage people to cycle, but at the same time we want to encourage everybody to be considerate towards other road users.
Yes.
And I think if anything has shown us in this COVID crisis, there is a small percentage of the population who will indulge in antisocial activities of all sorts, regardless of what you try and do. But that's a bit of a sort of a sideways comment. But I mean, I think it may be a comms issue, so perhaps we could refer it to comms to see whether, in fact, you know, in trying to encourage people to walk and cycle, we do have to actually encourage people to be considerate towards other road users, and that includes the motorists, of course. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Right, Asif, do you want to make a comment, or are you just saying you're using your phone again? You're using your phone again. Okay. Right, are there any other comments or questions? I don't see anything appearing. In which case, I'm going to ask panel once again if they'd indicate they note this report just for the record, please. So if you just indicate noted in the comment column for the record, that would be helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Catherine, and thank you very much indeed. Now we move on to item 7, return to school, home to school transport arrangements. We've got Andrew Highfield, probably, I think, supported by Jane Avery. Now, I think there was a big debate on this at education this morning, so, but nevertheless, this is this is the evening performance after the matinee, put it like that. So who's going to kick off? Andrew?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, panel. Yeah, my name's Andrew Highfield. I'm the new head of the Integrated Transport Unit. If you introduce yourself, Jane, as well.
Jane Avery. I am Strategy and Policy Manager for Admissions and Transport within Children's Services.
Thank you. So like you mentioned, Derek, we did a version of this to the panel this morning. So if anybody else was on that, you might get a bit of repetition, but hopefully it's useful. There's 2 key components we wanted to convey today, really. Draw on some of the highlights from the report that we submitted prior to school starting last week, and also talk a bit about obviously how it's gone as we're now on day 4 of schools returning. So I'll just talk about the report a bit first. This really documented our planning approach since really the start of July, when we had weekly cross-departmental meetings. The main government guidance was issued on the 11th of August. That also documented the funding that we would receive to allow us to provide some additional homeschool transport for September. We received 1.1 million in government funding in total. That was split between 950,000 in funding for additional vehicles and capacity for the network, as well as 150,000 for travel demand management measures, which I'll come on to in a bit more detail shortly. Our focus with those meetings and our approach was very much on special secondary and colleges schools. Those were where the majority of pupils do travel by transport, and primary schools less so. And as you can see in the report, it's sort of split into 2 main areas. So local authority transport, the guidance stated it's not mandatory to follow social distancing requirements on dedicated home to school services. However, we have put in place a number of measures to try and reduce the risk as much as possible. So we've put in place additional hygiene measures with operators, clear boarding and seating arrangements. We've also worked to allow sanitizer to be provided on all vehicles. We've requested additional cleaning and deep cleans on the vehicles. And we've also encouraged children to wear masks as appropriate through a comms campaign, which I'll come on to in a bit more detail in shortly. Another key thing we've done with some of the funding is to split schools on education routes to allow more capacity for those schools on those routes. And our special education needs and disability transport is really running as per normal with the operation there. In terms of public transport routes, social distancing of 1 metre plus is still required on public routes. So what we work to do in our approach is to procure a number of additional vehicles or duplicates to run on some key routes at key times to allow extra capacity for children to travel with a bit more space. Those duplicates have been clearly signed, and where possible are running first to allow children to enter them, and then the general public get on the next bus that comes along. We've got approximately 65 buses on commercial, contracted and e-routes running on a daily basis since day one, and they're all now in place. That was quite a huge procurement task in the last few weeks to work with local bus and coach operators to get those vehicles onto the network to provide that additional capacity. In terms of comms, there's a few key components here. So before the end of the summer term, we canvassed all schools in the area, in the county, on their key contacts and any different operating arrangements they may have in place. We surveyed all entitled children, which are around 2,200 in total, on travel choices. And we also emailed all of our entitled children, 5,000 total, on our planning and our approach. We also canvassed our 16,500 saver card holders, which we got about 6,000 responses back, indicating around 78% would use public transport. So that helped to inform our approach to capacity as well. We've also done quite a large media campaign. You may have seen some of that over the past few weeks. That includes social media, Spotify, radio, bus shelters and on buses to really promote safe travel and our approach to how we're going to increase capacity on the network. We also took measures like extending saver cards for 5 months to try and remove any issues in that process, and all saver card users were emailed with that information. And we also gave our operators guidance on safe travel and how to ensure the vehicles are deep cleaned and cleaned as appropriate. And finally, in terms of our planning approach, active travel. So we undertook a number of measures, including park and stride presentations to all schools, 600 or more cycling courses for schools. We also issued walking bubble maps for all schools to show them how they could introduce safe walking routes around their sites. And we also procured some extra variable message signs for high-risk congestion schools, so we could encourage travel behaviour at those sites as well. In terms of how it's gone, so we've been conducting a daily planning meeting since day one, which was Thursday, the 3rd of September. That included input from our 60 or 70 observers on the ground, looking at active travel, enforcement, and also bus occupancy. We've also been monitoring our customer channels for complaints, social media, any comments or general issues coming through. And we've also got feedback from our highways colleagues about how the network's been running from a traffic point of view. So operationally, we feel it's been going pretty well. We've had all of our duplicate vehicles out there across the network. We've had good feedback about good practice from schools, including Kings Langley, Barnwell, Sandringham and Knights Templar. Any issues around schools from our observers have been fed back individually to those schools. That could be issues around pavement crowding or parents on site. We've also anecdotally, and we're still waiting for more quantitative data on this, we've had good feedback about increase in active travel, so walking and cycling. Our school crossing patrols have told us it's the busiest they've ever been in terms of children walking, which is good. We've had a few capacity issues reported on some buses. So today we're looking at, for example, increasing some numbers at Queen's and Nicholas Breakspear, but we're double checking those numbers to make sure that's needed. But on the whole, our buses have coped with demand in terms of the capacity we've procured. No specific issues on SEND travel. We've had some usual complaints at start of term, but no more than usual, but they're being monitored. And we're feeding back to the DFA on a daily basis as we obviously work towards half term with the funding. So that is just a whistle stop, hopefully succinct presentation on where we are. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Jane?
No, thanks, Andrew. I think you've covered everything.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Andrew and Jane. I actually thought it's very important we got a report out to both of our panels on this issue, given the amount of work that was being undertaken by officers to prepare for the beginning of term. I thought it was important to get a report to panels, and also, of course, this is now in the public domain to illustrate. Actually, we've been ahead of the game here and really seriously on the case. But thank you very much. Now I'll open it up to any questions or comments from members. Please indicate in the chat line if you've got anything you wish to raise. Okay, Sandy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, exceedingly interesting report. So Thank you. I'm seeing the other end of the telescope because I represent St Albans South, and they have St Albans School there, who of course run their own massive bus operation. And it's quite interesting to see what's happening on our side of the fence. I mean, I'm impressed so far you've avoided problems with overcrowded buses, because even when the situation was normal, my daughter on some occasions had to wait for 3 buses before she'd be let on when she was trying to get home from school because they were already full. I think the $64,000 question, and none of us knows at the moment, dedicated school transport is being allowed to operate at capacity, apart from partially, as you note, having the row of seats behind the driver not filled if there's no screening for the driver. And I guess what may happen if that changes, and if there's a decision by public health nationally that you cannot continue with that if cases really spike amongst teenagers, we'll just have to wait and see, I guess. But I mean, that's when it really could get quite difficult.
Well, I just hope they shut the pubs first, that's all. But anyway, that's a personal comment. I think we've got to prioritise things here. But anyway,
the teenagers all go to the pubs, Derek. That's the whole bloody
Sorry?
problem, isn't it? The teenagers all go to the pubs. That's the problem.
I know. So doing anything on the buses is pretty meaningless. But anyway, okay. Thanks anyway, Sandy. Anybody else want to make any comments? Okay, I'd see no one. So just for the record, please, can we indicate we've noted with thanks this report? All right, thank you, members. And thank you, Jane, and thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all noted. Thank you very much indeed. We'll move to item 8, which is the Growth Infrastructure Planning Economy Performance Report. Who's going to start on this? It's Simon?
Yes, I can do, Chairman. I'll keep this very brief, follow the usual format, which is basically if you've got any questions, we're here to answer them. The report itself is, there's no particular highlights or lowlights, let's put it that way. An admission though, you'll note from the report that we are well aware that we made a promise to panel to review indicators and bring back a potential set of new draft, as a panel have asked us to do, more relevant indicators. That work has not progressed, I'm afraid. It's still on the to-do list, but it will get done. There are indicators on here, and one was mentioned earlier where we report them. We have no influence on them. We simply report. And some of the bus indicators perhaps need looking at as well. The only one I will point out, and if I can just go back to my agenda, the page I'm looking at is on the agenda package 357. It's just worth members noting, and I'm sure you will have done, the increase in section 19 flooding investigation reports we undertook in 2019. We are, I'm sure you're aware, getting increased occurrences of heavy rainfall, which causes surface water flooding, in particular in Hertfordshire, and that is leading to a greater number of reports. The reason for that peak, though, doesn't necessarily correspond with the fact that we had a lot more rain in 2019 than we did 2018, or not a lot more severe episodes. It's simply we got more staff in place. That said, though, we are seeing increased numbers of flooding events. So that was the only one I wanted to draw attention to. I don't know whether John wanted to pick anything, but if not, questions.
All right. John, do you want to bring anything else up?
No, there's nothing in this report.
All right, I'll open it up then to questions. Sandy, you did bring something up earlier on, which I think was sort of dealt with.
Yes, just to say, I mean, I wouldn't mind an answer. It's that table 5.3, and then apart from that, just to utterly echo the comment that some of these measures are a bit weird, and things like real-time information on bus stops when people have smartphones and things like that. One just needs to wonder whether we are measuring the right things.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to get you an answer on 5.3, so that's fine. I've got Steve Jarvis got a question. At the moment, Steve, we can't hear you. You're still not coming across, Steve. The only thing I would suggest is you type the question in chat and we can then try and answer it. No, I'm afraid we're not connecting at all with Steve at the moment, unfortunately. I've got no one else waiting to speak, so I'll say, I don't know if you can hear us, Steve. I presume you can, but at the moment we are not receiving you. Can you type anything in chat?
Derek, perhaps Steve can write a written question. Perhaps get a written response.
I think that's the answer. If you can't, if your system is now not as completely frozen, Steve, perhaps you could, if you can't type it in chat, just email something into myself, copy it to the officers, and we'll endeavour to pick up whatever your query is. Okay, all right. Well, hopefully Steve will be able to do that. And in the absence of any other requests for any questions or comments, I'm going to ask the panel to approve the resolutions, to note the resolutions on the order paper, which is noting the monitor, and in particular noting the fact that officers will bring forward a review of indicators before the end of the financial year, which I think is something that was referred to earlier by Simon. All right, can you indicate, please, everyone? Okay, all right. Thank you very much, everybody. Hopefully we can catch up with Steve Jarvis at some time. But at the moment, that brings us to the end of the part one business. There is no two business, so that brings us to the end of the meeting. Just to note that the next meeting, presumably under the same conditions, will be on the 8th of October. So can I thank officers for their contribution and members for their contribution, and at this point declare the meeting closed, and good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is nothing.